Hello and welcome back to this Down for Laserdisc Crusade. This will be the latest in my never-ending, it seems, series of Laserdisc collection update videos. As usual, I try to wait at least a little while until I have, maybe 5 or 10 discs to go over, so I'm not going over 1 or 2 discs at a time. And just like with all Laserdisc collectors, I think this is something all of us run into. Just when you think the well has dried up, and just when you think there's not going to be anything else that you need, and you've already got too many discs everywhere, and you're out of shelf space, and nothing's popping up in your local areas, all of a sudden they just find you. And so I had a number of things come from viewers and friends and podcast members. So I've got some mystery box items to go over, which are really cool. And then very surprisingly, one of the local stores got in a small lot of discs in addition to the rather big one they had come through that had all those unfortunate label stickers on them. But also they apparently got in an entire lot they purchased of, they said, over 4,000 disc titles. And those have been starting to appear piecemeal, and they have several different store locations, so they've started appearing in different locations, with a lot of really interesting titles you don't see every day, but unfortunately the pricing that the store has seems to be kind of all over the place, so a lot of discs showed up recently in the local area as well, which means I've now got a whole box of discs to go over. So as usual, when I think, oh, I don't have enough to make a video, I'll wait a little while. All of a sudden, before I know it, I've got a whole box to go over and then play the never-ending game of where the heck am I going to fit all of these? So to start, I want to go over the mystery box I got from Ian Stouffer, a great friend of this channel. He just literally hit me with a message saying, hey, would you like a mystery box? I'm like, well, sure, cool. It's still amazing that anybody wants to send me anything, so it's always an absolute joy to get any box. You of course get that sort of Christmas morning feeling, not knowing what's going to be in there. But he very graciously sent me 2 of the classic James Bond early analog pan and scan discs. I've been meaning to finish the pan and scans because they are kind of drying up. You usually see them go for a little bit of a premium just because they're Bond and they have the same, roughly the same covers as the CBS Fox VHS original run, which itself is sort of getting a little bit of collectability factor. But he sent me the original 20th Century Fox pressing of Goldfinger. So this still has the original United Artists logo only. Eventually this would be changed over to MGMUA, and it has the same sequence, or the same still from the laser scene that was used on the VHS and beta releases around this time. So, of course, for the first 3, this means you're getting a 133 opened up transfer of what should be either 166 or 185. And these old transfers on the old analog discs, they can hold up pretty well. Of course, the real problem with these is that on the LDs and on some of the tapes, not all of them, but the LDs especially usually suffer from time compression on these. Differing levels of speed up, usually on the older films, you wouldn't think it would need it because they would all fit on one side, but unfortunately, only few of the Bonds escaped time compression at this time. But the art, of course, looks much better on an LD jacket instead of looking at the VHS tape. I do have the original tape for Goldfinger, and I've always wondered what the LD compares like. I've compared pretty much every other version, so I always started out just going for the widescreen versions, but then over time with the Bonds, really, because it's my special life's crusade to nail down the best video transfer and audio transfer for each of the original Bond films. This is the one time where I don't really mind trying to track down every last version to simply compare transfers. And it is really cool getting all the pan and scan discs, but they have really been drying up. So usually you see like a lot of these pop up on eBay really dinged up, and somebody wants some absurd price when you're just looking at these just to complete the set. So this was really cool to get this in the mail. It's got a little bit of wear, but it's held up pretty well, and there is still a little bit of gloss on the jacket. So these are quite nice jackets for being so early in the LD era, but do keep in mind this will be analog mono only, and being such an old pressing, it will have some inherent noise. It'll have a much greater noise floor, and also you do have to deal with most of these having time compression on them. Also in the box, he very nicely sent me the original CBS Fox Pan and Scan 440 Rise only, which of course uses a part of the famous original Legs campaign from the original US poster. In the UK and other territories, they had the beautiful Brian Basuth painted version of this with a whole action landscape. But here in the US, we just got the singular Legs campaign image. So this is a great jacket to have if you want a nice display piece. And of course, you have the classic blue CBS Fox banner type design on the bottom. Well, I guess more technically Fox. So it's still a really nice jacket. It does have some wear because this is a 2-disc affair without a gatefold. So usually when you find one of these, it's gonna definitely have some seam splitting like this one does. So it's got a little wear, but it's still in pretty nice shape, and I definitely can't complain being able to chip off another of these finally, because again, I really wanted to get all of these to look at for the transfers to figure out which have time compression, which may have escaped that. This of course has a version of the Dolby Stereo mix. Moonraker and For Your Eyes Only were the first films to officially be in Dolby Stereo, and they pretty much stayed that way even on their first initial video releases. So if you're looking at the older Bond runs on tape and Laserdisc and even Betamax, you're going to notice that from Moonraker and For Your Eyes Only onward, they are all stereo compatible. Usually all the matrixing info carries over. So you can watch this and you can matrix it back out. It's probably not going to be as robust, obviously, as the PCM on the widescreen version. But again, it's always surprising how solid these old transfers are, even though they're pan and scan, because of course they're not throwing away any resolution for the letterboxing info. And again, it is getting tougher to get even the old pan and scan bonds in decent shape for an okay price. So this was really nice to get 2 of these in the mail, so I can now chip off 2 more off my want list. Then I got another package from our man in Japan, Luke Chinkata, who's also one of the key members of the Laserdisc Wolfpack podcast, which I get to guest on every once in a while. But he sent me some really cool discs. This first one, because of course Peter Bogdanovich's recent passing, I started talking about and thinking about all my LDs, and then it got me thinking about, once again, the director's cut of Texasville, the lesser discussed Last Picture Show sequel, that the cut that Bogdanovich wanted and then was never able to get released on DVD or Blu-ray in his lifetime, is still a Laserdisc exclusive, and it's still kind of really tricky to find. So he sent me this really lovely looking Japanese pressing of the theatrical cut. So this is the 126-minute theatrical cut that you can get on the standard Laserdisc, and it's the cut that you see on DVD and the once in a blue moon time the film shows on television. I think there may be some sort of HD master of this floating around somewhere. I think it may be just an upscale of the DVD master. But this has really nice art. It's still in the original shrink with the Obi strip. It has PCM mono, so this I think should match up pretty well. It's probably going to be the same master as the standard release US Laserdisc that's relatively common. I just have the director's cut version. I stumbled across it rather luckily a number of years ago, and I do think the director's cut is a better cut of the film. But this is just a really nice jacket with a cool gatefold, and just again, it's a very stark cover, but it really works. I love what they did with it image-wise. And so now I'll throw this on and check it out, compare it quality-wise and pressing-wise to the director's cut version. I still hope the director's cut of this film can get an HD release. I really wish it could have happened while Bogdanovich was still with us. It was something he tried to do, but again, it's still unfortunately stuck on Laserdisc. It is a better cut of the film. If you saw this years ago and you thought, oh well, this doesn't really stack up to the original, and that's something that's going to be hard to do anyway, the longer director's cut is better. It flows better, and I think it makes this a stronger sequel to the original film, something that feels much more directly connected. But even in the theatrical cut, there is good stuff there. I think it's an underrated film. Obviously, I don't think it is as much of a classic as the original, but it's still an admirable effort, and now I have this really cool Japanese pressing. Then, of course, knowing me and my old man dis ways, if there's ever any classic Hollywood film that pops up, and especially because Luke finds all kinds of amazing Japanese exclusives and Japanese pressings, if there's ever a question if anybody wants a classic Hollywood title, well, of course, it's going to be me. This also ties in with my never-ending quest to check every version of Citizen Kane I can get my hands on to see if there's a better source for the audio track anywhere. I managed to find a number of months ago that my old childhood VHS tape of Kane on the hi-fi track had less noise reduction applied to it than almost any other released period. I've since then been checking every tape and Laserdisc and DVD and import copy I can get my hands on. So he very kindly sent me this really beautiful 1980s original Japanese pressing of Citizen Kane. This is from the RKO Selection, so basically their own version of the RKO Classics program. This has the black cover, which is very similar to the way that the Hitchcock titles from Universal were done by CIC Video in Japan. If you've seen some of my other videos, I've gone over the ones I've found of those. And then you have this really nice matching obi strip. Unfortunately, this is analog only. It is not a fancy special edition or anything. This was really the first major Kane presentation on disc in Japan. But it's really seemingly, when you throw this on, it's some sort of print element that they transfer. The audio is a bit noisy, and again, it's directly sourced off of some sort of print. There is some wear, but it is an interesting experience seeing something. And obviously it has hard-coded Japanese subtitles, but seeing something this old, it's like from a different era, and it's a very warts and all presentation. It reminded me in some ways of the handful of RKO films that came out on Blu-ray in Japan a number of years ago. Films like Bringing Up Baby, and then also Notorious and a few others, where they were very much warts and all transfers of prints, and they weren't like restored versions here. But they also did some films that have not yet been fully restored. I think some of the Luton films got that treatment as well. So it's a different experience seeing more of a direct scan type of something that's not a vault element. And there's always some fun element to seeing that. So you get a little bit of that with this. Obviously, I can't necessarily recommend this transfer-wise for the usual difficulty you're going to have in finding a Japanese 1980s pressing and having to import it over here, but it's still a really cool piece of Kane's video history, and I really do like what they did with the cover, even though it's got the obvious necessary Japanese writing for the title on top, and it's still a really cool piece for any Kane collection, so thanks so much to Luke for this. But he also sent me the matching series disc for the follow-up, the legendary Magnificent Ambersons. This also in this RKO selection program with a nice red and black obi strip. Again, beautiful cover, even though the image choice is a little simple. The rendering is really nice. But what's amazing about this is actually a double feature release, because if you flip it over, you get the much lesser known semi-follow-up Journey into Fear, which was also a Mercury production, starring Joseph Cotten and Orson Welles, but of course not directed by Welles, which is why some people try to claim it was slightly ghost directed by Welles, or then otherwise choose to ignore it, saying, oh, well, it wasn't directed by Orson, so it doesn't matter. But it's a really admirable atmospheric effort that shows that the Mercury film idea could apply to quote-unquote more normal, straightforward films. And of course, it's adapting a classic Eric Ambler short story. But of course, Journey into Fear exists in a number of different cuts, so I'm really curious. I haven't got to throw this on yet. I'm very curious to check out the mastering on these, see what sources they used. I'm sure, like Citizen Kane, these will be print sourced. But of course, for the longest time, Ambersons did not have a DVD release or a Blu-ray release, and the best you could do was the Criterion CAV Special Edition Laserdisc and have a look at its exclusive extras. So I will be comparing this to the Ambersons Criterion CAV set to see if there's any differences or see if they compare pretty well. And overall, it's just a beautiful release with a lovely gatefold. And I had no idea Journey into Fear was in here. I thought it was just, when I knew there was an Ambersons Japanese LD, I thought it was just, it's just the single film, because it is a longer film, but they somehow packed in Journey into Fear. It helps Journey into Fear. It has more of a B film runtime. It's obviously not the epic scale of Ambersons, and of course, it helps. It helps. I think it's the only time it's ever helped Ambersons being butchered down to 88 minutes that then they could ostensibly get both films into one release. If this was the original 142-minute some odd version, it would obviously not be able to accommodate Journey into Fear on a second disc. So I think this is the one time you can be slightly glad that Ambersons was cut down to 88 minutes in terms of the length, because that way they could package both films on here. But this is just a lovely Japanese exclusive presentation with gorgeous gatefold arts. I can't wait to check this out and compare it to all the other versions I have. And Journey into Fear still, it's had some restorations. They did find some of the missing footage. I believe it was in Spain. They finally put together the Spanish version that runs a little bit longer. longer. So this is still a film that is in dire need of a 4K scan and at least a Blu-ray presentation. I think it's kind of silly we haven't gotten this on official DVD releases here or on a lovely Blu-ray release. This is a Prime Criterion title if they're listening. It's a Prime title for anyone, but it definitely should happen, especially since there have been some restorations that restored additional footage. Now to move on to all the other discs, which I'll first go over the handful that will go in my favorite director's shelves before moving on to stuff chronologically. This first one is from that massive 4,000 disc lot that went to my local chain of record stores. What's interesting about these, it actually seems like they're all ex-rental titles, but they are the most beautifully preserved rental discs I've ever seen. For my Michael Curtiz shelf, I finally managed to get a clean copy of the pressing of Yankee Doodle Dandy. This is a lovely 2-disc gatefold affair, and again has the same shrink wrap with the sticker on it. Because this is a gatefold, I'm probably going to remove the shrink wrap. But this is a really nice looking jacket. This is where MGMUA was getting better with their packaging, getting more elaborate. And it also includes not just the trailer for the film, but it does include an original short as well. So the film is just over 2 hours, and you also get some additional supplemental features, which was pretty special at this time if it wasn't a big deluxe package. And they weren't even doing a whole lot of those. Basically, it would be your occasional one like Singing in the Rain that would have a couple more extras because it was such a big title. But this is still a nice presentation, and I've wanted to get this to check out the PCM mono track on it for a while and compare it to the DVD and the beautiful Warner Archive Blu-ray. Then next, they had a title I've always wanted to find that rarely pops up. So for my John Ford shelf, I've moved closer to Ford LP completion. They had the early Columbia pressing of the classic Two Rode Together. This is still in the shrink. It's in the traditional Image jacket because this is when Image was still handling all the Columbia titles, and it still has the RCA Columbia logo. Unfortunately, this is a pan and scan affair, but the great thing is this has PCM mono, which is why I wanted to pick this up, because I try to compare all the Ford titles on video as well, and you never know when it's going to be a distinct improvement or just be an old print transfer and be pan and scanned and presented in this fashion. So it's always fun playing that sort of LD roulette in terms of it's sort of a roulette wheel for what the transfer and the audio is going to be like. But I always wanted to try and find this simply because it has a digital mono track, and I love the lead pairing, and of course any Jimmy Stewart Western I'm obsessed with, just like I'm obsessed with any Ford Western. But this is a great underrated Ford Western. Doesn't get talked about very much. There is a nice Blu-ray available from Masters of Cinema I've been meaning to import, but I've always wanted to find this, and it rarely pops up, so I couldn't believe this was floating around in my local store bin. Then at a store they had this disc for very, very cheaply, so even though I really didn't need it, I couldn't leave it sitting there because I'm a David Lean nerd, and so when I see the original first letterbox pressing of Lawrence of Arabia on the original late 80s, early 90s release, I think this disc is technically 89 or 1990, so coming right off the heels of the 1989 restoration. When I find this for less than $1 and I'm just curious about the transfer, I can't leave it sitting there. And even though it's got the semi-generic cover design of this time, like The Awful Truth, the cover is actually pretty nice, even with the red border. It really looks nice. But you wouldn't think this is a widescreen presentation. I always thought it was pan and scanned, but it actually is widescreen. The only way you're really going to know is down here at the very, very bottom. You get the little blurb about the letterbox format. So this is, of course, long before they realized, hey, let's make the covers look better than just a bigger version of a crappy old VHS sleeve, and actually put the widescreen information on the front, and we can make it look really nice and entice people to actually buy yet another copy of Lawrence. But this also has a nice little gloss on the sleeve. It unfortunately isn't a gatefold, so it is prone to getting corner wear and everything. But again, it looks rather impressive. The sound is digital, Dolby Stereo encoded, so I'm sure this is the same track right off the 1989 restored audio, so this will compare very favorably or be perhaps identical to the Criterion presentation around the same time period. I'm pretty sure this is probably going to be the same video master shared between the Sony Columbia release and the Criterion, but of course the Criterion has the CAV edition for better picture quality and the special edition with all the extras, whereas this is just the movie only. So I kind of think if this follows what I think it's going to be, and this will be the same master, it'll probably follow like what happened on Spartacus, where Criterion did the big special edition and Universal did their movie only version at the same time. If you put those two discs on at the same time, the source master is the same. The Criterion just has the better presentation and all the extras. But I just always wanted to look at this. I was very curious to look at the transfer. I find it really interesting to look at Lawrence in particular and all the different iterations on video. And again, this is just a really nice copy for less than $1. So I just was like, yes, this is coming home with me. Next for my City Lumet shelf is a film that I've wanted to rewatch for ages. I remember it being fantastic, and it unfortunately doesn't have a great Blu-ray release like it really deserves, and the DVD is quite out of print. But that is the film Q&A. This is the HBO video presentation pressed by Image from that lot, so it's still in the shrink and looks rather nice. This just does not pop up very often. It's one of those where it's technically not rare. You won't have to pay an arm and a leg for it, but if you were to try and pick it up on eBay, you're probably gonna have to pay $5 or $10 plus shipping. So it was really cool to find this. It has the Dolby Stereo soundtrack as PCM, but unfortunately is a 133 presentation. I'm pretty sure this film was shot spherical 185, so this would be opened up. I don't think it's scope, so I don't think this is a pan and scan transfer, but still, this is not the way you want to watch great films like this, where it was composed for mounted widescreen. Sometimes if the transfer operator was worth his salt and actually paid attention, or it was director supervised, if it's framed just right, a 133 transfer can still be pleasant, but if it's not framed just right, it can skew your viewing experience. Unfortunately, this is the only real Laserdisc presentation, so I'm sure the audio is much better than the DVD, which itself is unfortunately also 133. So this is one of those Lumet films that has really flown under the radar and really is in dire need of a video overhaul. This would be a great Blu-ray title for one of the boutique labels to do, especially with a new scan. But in the meantime, I am excited to rewatch it, even if it is on the 133 Laserdisc presentation. Then for Leo McCarey, they had a markdown copy of the original pressing of the masterpiece, The Awful Truth. The reason why I wanted to pick this up is all the Sony Columbia restorations of their classic screwball comedies of the 30s and 40s, and also their Frank Capra library. Depending on who's released them and all the various restorations, some have varying degrees of extra noise reduction applied, and sometimes, in some cases with certain films, by going back to even the oldest of releases, you can actually find a better audio track. So even though this is analog mono, I was just curious to check this out because I've checked out a number of versions of The Awful Truth. And I've just wondered if somehow this older pressing could perhaps have a cleaner sounding mono, even though it is analog, because it is possible. There are some analog discs out there, even analog mono, that actually do manage to sound better than overzealously cleaned up later tracks on various later releases. Even though the restoration and the Criterion Blu-ray of this film is beautiful with great extras, I was curious to check this out, and they had this lovely condition, very inexpensive copy. This is like literally 25 cents, so of course it's got my name all over it. Unfortunately, the only problem is apparently Harry wrote his name on it many years ago, so but other than that, it's actually a rather nice jacket at this time for Sony Columbia, and they're actually doing it themselves instead of the Image cover, and it's got a slight gloss to it, so it's actually, pretty displayable in terms of a jacket, so rather nice for this era, I have to admit. Also directed by Leo McCarey is the more obscure Once Upon a Honeymoon, which pairs Cary Grant with Ginger Rogers. This is, again, on the traditional we didn't really care, so it's a generic cover Image jacket with picture sized for a VHS slipcase. Unfortunately, this is also from that original lot where the owner made their own labels, and so I've got to I don't really think I can get that off without ripping the cover, and I've got to work the price sticker off. But other than that, this was marked down to be super cheap, and it has PCM mono. And for films like this with lesser video releases and sometimes titles that are only available from like the Warner Archive DVD division, a lot of times they're going to be reusing the same masters, maybe perhaps dating all the way back to the Laserdisc. So sometimes the Laserdisc is much cheaper if you can find it like this locally and not pay eBay prices. And this has just always been on my watch list, so I'm finally going to watch it on this Laserdisc presentation. Then, really interestingly, they had a disc from the classic Cinema Disc collection. So, this is the 1931 first sound feature of the legendary genre noir. This is Chien, which was remade by Fritz Lang as the classic masterpiece noir Scarlet Street. So I had actually forgotten that Renoir had made this first, and so you can actually see two versions of the same story. This, of course, will be in French with subtitles, but this is part of the nice Cinema Disc collection where Image and partnering with others was trying to get more foreign films on disc, and is sort of their approach at doing their own version of the Criterion collection. And hey, they made the disc picture gold, so it's got to be special. They colored the image. The image puts like 2 degrees of effort into their jackets, right? But this does have digital sound. So it's PCM French with hard-coded English subtitles, and of course 133 being a very early sound feature. But yeah, I've never gotten to see this all the way through. I've seen clips of it, I think, in some documentaries. And again, I had forgotten that Renoir had done the same story that was made into Scarlet Street, which I love. So it'll be really interesting to check it out on this presentation. Of course, technically, this will be superseded by later versions, but you never know when the old LD can actually hold up pretty well and also have a really great soundtrack as well. And it's very rare that I find any Cinema Disc titles in the wild. I think I've only ever gotten 1 or 2 of these in my collection, because usually other versions supersede these, or they're too pricey, or I just never really got around to getting more of these. So this will be interesting to check out in this particular pressing. This goes on my Ridley Scott shelf. This one is much more common, but it's hard to find not totally trashed. But I finally got a copy of White Squall in the letterboxed edition. This is technically a Disney disc, so it's got their traditional logos and layouts and such. I haven't seen this in a long time, but it's sort of been stuck as a budget title. It's gotten done on Blu-ray by first Mill Creek, and then that switched over to Kino Lorber. But I remember people always talking about this had a pretty good 5.1 mix on it, and this does indeed have an AC3 5.1 track on it. So this is one of those cheap titles, if you can find them, with an AC3 track if you're looking for a nice AC3 work disc or demo disc. And again, I saw this ages and ages ago, so I only have certain fleeting memories about it, and I always forget it's part of the Ridley Scott canon sometimes, but I've been meaning to revisit it. Now I can finally do it on the Laserdisc edition, because I've just passed on this before, because usually all I find are really trashed copies. Again, it is a 2-disc LD set inside of a non-gatefold sleeve, which is how you get most trash discs, just from the wear and tear of being in bins over the years. But it does have a nice glossy finish to it. Again, this is a pretty nice looking Disney disc for the time. The cover art looks pretty good, even though it is playing around with what was obviously used for the VHS cover art as well. So this is the lovely MGMUA presentation of the first of the Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn films, and one of the masterpieces of romantic comedies, of course, is Woman of the Year. This was released on DVD by Warner, and then Criterion did a lovely Blu-ray special edition. But I've always wanted to find the Laserdisc, because it does have a PCM mono track, and that was rare for MGM at this time. You can tell by the cover design, this is in their transitional period, so they were still sticking mostly to analog only. They did finally start doing more of the Hepburn and Tracy films, but it's rare for them to, at this time, actually have a digital soundtrack. And again, the cover's a bit different with the pink and blue and the whole layout. So this is, again, very much at MGMUA at their transitional point in terms of LD releases. And as you can see, this is still in the shrink wrap. And what the store did is they would put a little genre sticker here. So all of these have a little circle sticker. And then on the back, they have an actual inventory code with the title nicely printed there. So outside of that, I mean, this is an immaculate disc with some age wear, but it's still in the shrink. There's no stickers on the actual disc. There is a little tiny one on the store for the store, actually on the label, but it's very unobtrusive. You can see that there. And then all of the original sleeves have been replaced by nice polylined inners with this little stamp on it. So I didn't mind picking up a number of these at a nice price, because essentially, even though they were rental discs, they are the most perfectly preserved rental disc I've ever seen. They don't have scratches on them or anything in terms of the disc surfaces. So I've wanted to check this out for the PCM Mono for ages. It rarely pops up, so I was very happy to finally find one of these. I went over this disc in my video on what I found at the local record show, but I figured I'd quickly mention it here. But I did find a music disc, which is the U2 Octone Baby release, which is a mixture of live footage from the Zooropa tour and also some of the videos from the Octone Baby era. Really nice art. It's a disc that doesn't pop up all the time. Most of this stuff, as far as I can understand, has made it over to various DVDs and compilations and things. So it's not exactly essential, but it's a really cool piece to have. It does have PCM stereo, which should sound really nice. The art looks really cool on the jacket. It's a nice part of U2 on Laserdisc to have if you're a big fan of the band and you have an LD player. This is a cool piece to track down. It's not super expensive, but it doesn't really pop up all the time. So this is something that you'll probably have to pay much more, like $10 or $15 for at least. So it was one of those cool random Laserdisc finds in a box of records, just not marked. So, it was in a box of $2 records, and I'm like, hey, wait a minute, let me flip back. That's an LD. So it was really cool to find this, and of course, this era of the band's history is iconic. So it's really cool to have represented in Laserdisc form. So now we move on to titles going chronologically, and this one I'm really excited over. I haven't seen this film in far too long, and this is a disc that just never pops up. I never expected to see this pop up in a local store, let alone in perfect shape. But this is the absolutely essential 1926 film that premiered Warner Brothers Vitaphone sound on disc system. That is, of course, the classic Don Juan, starring John Barrymore. This is the film that iconically brought sound effects into motion picture history, really for the first time to really wow audiences. So this film's historical importance is just off the charts. It unfortunately does not have a Blu-ray release. You can get it on DVD through the Warner Archive, I believe, but I'm sure it probably is the same master as this LD. This is from the MGMUA Silent Classics banner, so it has the really cool silver logo with the film pieces coming out to form the rest of the traditional MGM logo. Really nice cover art. It's black and white and very striking like this, but it's also got a really cool gatefold. What's most amazing about this is that side one actually is the original program of Vitaphone shorts to demonstrate the sound system and the program that would play sometimes as a standalone, but usually tied with the feature. You'd sit through some of these first, then get to see Don Juan in its original premiere engagement. It's amazing that these survived with the sound actually as well, and it's really amazing that they included this as part of the Laserdisc package. So you put the disc on side one, and it is literally the opening by Will Hayes himself of Hayes Code fame, and then you get various musical pieces, the overture, and then all of these shorts really showing off the sound system, and then you jump into Don Juan, the feature itself, on sides 2 and 3. So this is a really excellent package, and for this time in 1991, I think this would definitely be considered as a special edition release. This is going really to the lengths that MGMUA under George Feltenstein would further the cause of home video special features and extras and presentations. So this is still a great way to see this film because it does have PCM audio, and again, to see this film on DVD, you'd have to get it from the Warner Archive, and chances are it's the same master or slightly cleaned up from this Laserdisc presentation. I'm not sure. I would think that would also include the Vitaphone shorts with it, but I'm not for sure if it does. It may not. I've always wanted to get that DVD. It's just been one of the many admittedly hundreds of Warner Archive discs on my never-ending wish list, but it was really cool to stumble across this in the wild because this is a disc that never pops up. So I'm really excited to revisit this with the Vitaphone shorts on Laserdisc. Next was a classic title I picked up simply because it was in such nice shape, and again, less than $1. You put any classic out, regardless of format, and it's less than $1, and the temptation for me is real. So they had this lovely encore edition of Holiday Inn, Again, from that same lot, so it's still in the shrink wrap. It's in really nice shape. Unfortunately, this is like most Encore discs. It is analog sound only, but I have been surprised by a lot of Encore titles. They do hold up transfer-wise pretty well, even if they don't have digital sound. This actually has legitimate chapter stops, which is a rarity for Encore discs. Usually Encore discs have one chapter, which is film end on side two. Or no, sorry, chapter one is film start and chapter two is film end on side two. So this is really built around the songs and the musical numbers, but at least they've identified them here, and that's amazing for an Encore disc that it actually has legitimate chapter stops. So hats off to Universal finally doing chapter stops at this time. But again, this was just a nice condition classic that, again, less than $1, so it's definitely coming with me. Next is a disc that rarely pops up. This is actually a pretty late release because it came out in 1997, so it's getting on up there. It's not a full late release like it's 98 or 99, but pretty close, and this is rather uncommon. But they had the 1948 classic noir called Northside 777, which is so late you can tell it's under the 20th Century Fox Studio Classics banner, which you only started seeing by like really 94, 95, 96 into 97. This was released on DVD as well, which I have, so I'm curious to see how it compares. It's of course got PCM mono, but like a lot of later Fox discs, it has this really beautiful rear cover with a nice full jacket essay, lovely layout, lovely designs, very easy on the eyes. You have a little tiny image of the original poster that they used on the DVD. The front cover looks good, but of course it would have been even better had they just made the original poster with Jimmy on it there as the whole front cover jacket image. This has PCM mono, as I said, but it also includes the original trailer, and apparently it's also got the original Fox Movie Tone news section about the film or tied to the film's original release. So this is a really interesting noir. It's a nice key film from the late 40s in terms of Stewart's career, and actually helped further the cause of seeing Jimmy Stewart as not the aw shucks boyish character of the 1930s pre-war films. So this is coming off the heels of It's a Wonderful Life and Magic Town, and Stewart trying to find his footing, which he really wouldn't do fully until 1950 with Winchester 73 and Anthony Mann. But this would also be the same time Stewart was working with Hitchcock for the first time on Rope. And I do think there are some interesting parallels with the darker persona of Stewart's on-screen persona, I should say, that you were seeing in films like this. There is a little bit of that in this film as well. So this fits in nicely with these immediate post-war films of Stewart's career, where he's really having to struggle to find his footing and be accepted at the box office again. So this is a nice key noir for the late 1940s. It doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but this is a lovely, pretty late Fox presentation that just does not pop up. So I was very excited to find this. Next is another from the original stickered lot, and first I should say thanks goes to Ron Hall, a friend of this channel and fellow Laserdisc Forever member, who also lives in the same town and helps when I don't go into some of the local stores and he spots some LDs or vice versa. We always message each other and say, hey, there's some new discs in. So thanks to Ron for helping me find some of these. So this is the 1948 Arthur Freed produced MGM musical Words and Music that pairs together not just Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland, but also Gene Kelly and a whole host of other MGM stars. It's in this wonderful package. It's a gatefold set release. Of course, George Feltenstein, who is now in charge of Warner Archive, is a gigantic classic musicals fan, and of course was able to put together wonderful packages like these during his tenure at MGMUA Home Video. And so all the MGM musicals started getting nicer LD packages like this. This is just a film-only affair, but side 3 is in CAV, so you can get more of the musical numbers in full CAV trick play. And it's a nicer package that, again, MGMUA was starting to do around this time. It has PCM mono sound, which should be really nice, and even still has the fancy little MGM order insert, hyping up titles and then giving you their main title order list on the back. So it's rare that these are still floating around inside copies, so it's really cool when you get one that's still nice and complete. Next up is 1949's Sorrowful Jones on a lovely Encore edition from Universal. I've been trying to see more of Bob Hope's filmography, so this is just looked like an interesting disc to try out. And As an encore disc, it has the all-important nice digital sound moniker, this being a 1992 pressing, once Universal decided that digital audio was important, and thankfully started including it on all their titles. So as you can see, it's a fancier rear jacket, it has actual chapter stops for the two sides, and does include the theatrical trailer. So it's just a film-only disc, but I figured this would be a cool way to finally see more of Bob Hope's filmography, and be interesting to see him paired with Lucille Ball, and it looks like a fancier and much nicer encore jacket, so that's always a nice touch. Next up is the interesting and something you don't see on LD hardly ever, but the 1955 Pete Kelly's Blues, the 1920s gangster slash musical drama set in the speakeasies of the late 1920s, but actually directed by Jack Webb and starring Jack Webb as well. This title, I believe, has been done by the Warner Archive on Blu-ray, but it was just really cool to find the Laserdisc with this really nice vintage art. The rear, though, is just standard Warner Brothers fare in terms of design and layout, but it looks pretty nice. This is a 1991 pressing. This is a letterbox copy, hence the widescreen banner is here on the back instead of on the front, as is common of Warner's. You always have to check all over to make sure it's actually widescreen somewhere. And of course, sometimes they wouldn't even tell you that. But this does very nicely indicate this is Dolby Surround encoded, meaning that this probably had a original 4-channel stereo mix from the mid-1950s, being a 50s widescreen title. Of course, this has, again, like I said, it's been done by the Warner Archive, but I was just curious. I've never gotten to see this before, and I know this is not a super common LD, so I figured it would be fun to check out on Laserdisc first, and then hopefully eventually get the Warner Archive Blu-ray as well. Next is 1958's The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. This is a really late 1997 MGM letterbox pressing that is very uncommon, so I couldn't believe this was floating around. Anytime you see this black deluxe letterbox banner on top, you know it's a late MGM disc, because they really only started using that in the last 2 or 3 years of their Laserdisc output. But it's a rather nice cover. It's got the very thin but very highly glossy jacket, as you'll find on all late period MGM Laserdisc releases. This would have been ported over for the initial DVD release, as MGM did with all of their Video Masters. But it looks like a fine jacket and should be a really great late pressing. This is one of those nuclear Holocaust survivors films that really started to come to the fore in the middle of the Cold War. I've only gotten to see pieces of this before, but so this will be a first-time watch through for me. I believe this has also gotten a nice Blu-ray release, but this looks like a fine presentation. This has PCM audio. It indicates that it's stereo, and since this is a CinemaScope film, it would have had a 4-track stereo mix most likely, so I'm guessing maybe that's matrixed, or it could be mono. Sometimes the jackets were not always the most accurate things in the LD era, so sometimes you really have to just put the disc in and check it out. But it does include the theatrical trailer at the end. There's no other goodies like an isolated score that I'm aware of, but it was just really cool to find a rather late, uncommon MGM late release just floating around in your local store bin. Here's another very uncommon 1997 MGM pressing. This is for 1964's The Best Man. This is the film. Gore Vidal wrote the screenplay based on his original stage play, starring Henry Fonda, Cliff Robertson, and the great Kevin McCarthy, but directed by Franklin J. Schaffner, who is a great favorite of mine for many films. This political satire, really attack on American politics, I've always seen clips of and other things, but I've never gotten to see the whole film. It's always been on my to-watch list. It's not a film that you really hear discussed all that often, if ever, and this is a really nice LD pressing. Again, it's a 1997 release, so it's got a much nicer layout and design, single CLV disc with the very nice high gloss MGM jacket, as I just said, as on the previous disc, another 1997 release. The only problem here is this is an opened up transfer. It's a 133 transfer, so it is unfortunately not widescreen as every film in 1964 would have been. It's unfortunate. It's like a number of late release LDs where unfortunately they're an open matted or opened up or some pan and scan transfers. So even at the tail end of LD, you would get some discs like this where it's a nice transfer and a nice disc, but unfortunately it's not widescreen. But this does have PCM audio. I believe it should be mono, I would think. It's not credited, but I believe this is PCM mono. So I will finally get to see this film on this release, and will hopefully be able to check it out against as a widescreen presentation. But again, this is just a film I've seen clips of. I've always wanted to see the whole thing. And again, super exciting to find 1997 MGM releases just in your local stores. This does not happen hardly ever. Next is the 1966 wacky classic A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. This is a lovely letterbox MGM presentation from the early 1990s, but once they had made their fancier letterbox banner on the top. Really nice art, even though it is in still the slightly airbrush colored design of most MGM jackets, but it looks really nice and perfectly lets you know what sort of film this is if you haven't seen this before. This was directed by Richard Lester. It has a lot of his trademark sort of inherent wackiness throughout, and it's an interesting blend of historical film and then satirical comedy. Plus, you have Zero Mostel and so many great faces in this film, but of course you have the great stone face himself, Buster Keaton, here, in one of his real nice standout moments in a major feature film, really towards the end of his career. So thankfully he was at least getting the occasional thing like this where he could actually get more of a showy part, or at least a presence in a bigger film instead of appearing in one of the AIP beach films as he did. But this is just a fun film to come back to every once in a while. And I've always meant to check out the LD pressing, which of course has PCM audio, so I will be revisiting this film on the lovely MGMUA presentation. It does include the trailer, but otherwise it's just a nice single disc CLV release. Keeping in the comedy vein, next is the MGMUA presentation of 1970's Where's Papa, which was directed by Carl Reiner. This is a film I've always wanted to see and never gotten to, especially since I'm a giant fan of Carl Reiner's films with Steve Martin, especially Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. So this just always seemed appealing to me. I just never have gotten to see it. It's a nice looking presentation from MGMUA, but once again, I'm pretty sure I believe this is open mat or 1.33, so it's not, unfortunately, a letterbox transfer. But otherwise, it has PCM mono and it includes a reissue trailer. And I do kind of like the yellow background on the rear. It looks kind of nice and gives you the sort of quirky feel that is seemingly the spirit of this. So this is going to be another that I will finally watch for the first time on LD. Next is the 1971 John Wayne vehicle, Big Jake, in this nice Fox jacket with some custom artwork. And this is still in the shrink with a really nice widescreen sticker on here. So I've not seen this particular widescreen indicator before. I don't know if it was put on by perhaps an original store or if it came from the factory like this, but I always love it when you get special widescreen indicator stickers like that, just like the old Dolby Digital AC3 stickers that used to be on some discs. So this is a Fox release. It's letterbox. It's credited with a stereo mix. I'm not sure if this was originally released in mono or stereo, or if it's perhaps somehow a 4-track stereo mix or something. But I haven't seen this particular film in a very long time, so I will be revisiting it on this release. It's got a nice fancier rear cover with the sort of old-timey parchment that Fox gave to a number of Westerns once they started making fancier jackets like this. This particular disc dates back to 1992, and outside of the nice little small little bit of text, there are no extras and no trailers, so it's just a single CLV disc. So this brings me one step closer to having all the main John Wayne Westerns that were on nice Laserdisc editions on LD. This is just one of the ones I didn't have from Fox once they started making widescreen transfers. Next is, surprisingly, a really nice Disney live-action title in terms of LD edition. This is 1974's The Island at the Top of the World from the Studio Film Collection. This is the type of cover you'll see on most of the live-action, non-animated Disney titles they were doing that didn't get the archive treatment. This has PCM audio, which I'm not sure if this is mono or stereo. The jacket doesn't really indicate it. And as you can see, this is from that original, from that same lot of former rental titles. But really nicely on all of these had a custom widescreen sticker that must have been exclusive to this actual location. So all of the widescreen titles that are in shrink from this lot all have this really cool, simple, but classy widescreen sticker indication on there, which is really nice. And this looks pretty much like it was unplayed, so I couldn't believe it was in the bins for less than $1. But this has some nice features, like a lot of titles in this run. So it's widescreen, of course. It has PCM audio. but it also has, very interestingly, the score was composed by Maurice Jarre, and the actual analog track has the isolated film score, which apparently for the longest time was the only way you could get something resembling the complete Maurice Jarre score for this film. And it wasn't until a couple years ago, I think it may have been Entrada Records, released the complete score on a deluxe CD package. So for the longest time, the LD was prized among soundtrack collectors, and it'll be still really fun to listen to it that way, since I don't have that release and I haven't seen this film before. I do know its reputation. It's as essentially, a lot of people have said it's sort of a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea knockoff, which is ironic coming from Disney since they produced 20,000 Leagues. But I've always meant to see it. I'm always very curious about the Disney live action films that have sort of fallen by the wayside, even if their reputations aren't the greatest. And I love Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea so much that I am beyond willing to see all of the derivatives that came out in the next few decades when they would try the sort of Jules Verne, H.G. Wells adaptation genre again, if you want to call that a genre. In fact, that's what is literally stated on the rear text as the what this film is like. But you get a nice jacket. It is crediting that it is letterboxed to approximately 1.75 to 1. It's actually telling you what the track information is. So this actually is giving you more information than your typical Disney disc. The film is split on two sides, two CLV sides, and outside of the isolated score, the extras are newly restored and remastered, and original full-length theatrical cut of 94 minutes. So I'm not sure if there was an edited version or that's just a hype sticker, but still a really nice find, and just one of those Disney films that's fallen by the wayside that I've always been curious about seeing, and will now finally do so on LD. Next is one of those discs that I am shocked to find in the bins for super cheap and wonderful shape, and doubly so that somebody hadn't come in and snatched it before me, and that is the nice special edition of the John Carpenter Assault on Precinct 13, the full-on widescreen collector's edition with this gorgeous jacket. I mean, this is a fantastic LG jacket, even though it isn't a gatefold. And as you can see, it's from the same lot, so it has this really cool widescreen sticker, and then it also has this really nice gold sticker mentioning about the director's commentary. And a lot of the discs in this lot seem to have additional gold custom stickers indicating alternate audio options or tracks. So this has to be one of the most thoughtful rental stores I've ever seen, because all their discs are immaculate and they all have these nice stickers, but on the shrink and not the discs themselves. The rear is perfect with this wonderful full jacket essay, and then telling you about the special features. It's a digital transfer in the scope Panavision ratio, that the John Carpenter commentary is on analog track 1. It also includes Carpenter's score on analog track 2, and it also includes the original trailer. It has PCM mono, and it's just a beautiful jacket. It's a release I've always wanted to try. I do have the fancy Shout Blu-ray, but this is a film I've wanted to return to and see the Laserdisc version, because it's very curious, since it's quite prized and everybody loves this art, and I always wanted to look at it and check out the transfer and the audio. I'm now finally able to do so, and I just can't believe I finally found one of these in this good a shape without having to pay through the nose for it. Next is a more common title from 1984. This is the Universal Letterbox release of Iceman. I wanted to see this since I read Norman Jewison's book. He wound up producing this film, but he had some interesting things to say about this film's production. So when I found it floating around for like 50 cents, I was like, okay, I can finally see this. And it's a nice Letterbox Universal title. Dolby Stereo on the PCM track, nothing fancy, but you get a nice little bit of text about the making of the film and this rather nice imagery on the back. So it's always seemed like an interesting premise. It's a type of premise that's been done a number of times, but again, I've just been meaning to look at this, and I'm a great fan of John Lone in the handful of films I've seen him in, and this apparently, if I'm remembering correctly, was his first film, so I'm doubly interested to finally check this out, and I'll see it on LD. This is the other of the discs I've always tried to get. It always eludes me, and people pay quite a bit for this particular pressing. The pan and scan version goes for quite a bit, but the letterbox version is usually very expensive. So was very pleased that this didn't get snapped up before I could finally get a copy of the Letterbox Commando. So this is the fancier Fox widescreen version from later on down the road. Still in the shrink with this nice custom widescreen sticker. The jacket is in perfect shape. It's very common for discs of this era to be dinged up and have corner dings because it's just a regular disc kicking around. In terms of the pressing, it's just a standard CLV disc with the original Dolby Stereo mix as PCM. CLV, two sides, nothing fancy. I don't even think it has the trailer. Yeah, it's just film only, no trailer, but a nice little bit of text. This seems very much in keeping with the, it looks very similar to the design Fox gave the Die Hard THX remasters. So this fits right in with their reissues of their big 80s action titles around this time. And this is the version of Commando that you'll want to find because it's actually widescreen, but it's the one you do have to kind of chase after because it does not pop up very often. And when it does, people do pay quite a bit for this. So I've been waiting to rewatch this film until I finally found this letterbox pressing because I really wanted to see it on LD. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I do remember I've always kind of enjoyed the inherent poking fun at itself nature to the humor, which really helps to undercut the fact that the violence goes into the gloriously over the top, which again plays into the sort of inherent knowing fourth wall breaking humor, which is why I think people have such fun for this film. So it'll be fun to revisit this and hear the Dolby Stereo track on the Letterbox LD because this thing took me ages to find at a decent price. So it's very exciting to finally find this. Next is a film I love and adore from 1988. This is the standard release pressing of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, the great Frank Oz picture with the dream casting of Michael Caine with Steve Martin. This is one of those 80s comedy gems that if you haven't seen, then you've really got to go and see it. It has great flavor of classic era Hollywood comedies of the 30s and 40s, but with a really nice dark edge to it. This is the original image pressing with their traditional cover design. It does have PCM audio, but it is not widescreen, so this is a 133 presentation. I do have the DVD and I have the two different Blu-rays and of course the Shout Factory version that actually does have some extras, but I was always curious about the film's original Dolby Stereo SR mix, which is on here as PCM. I was holding out. There is a much rarer, much more obscure and harder to find widescreen pressing. It's sort of like a stealth widescreen reissue, but I've never found a copy for cheap of either version. So when I found this one floating around for less than $1 in really nice shape, I figured it was finally time to try out one of the LD pressings. Next is an upgrade for a title that I finally got, but with a dinged up jacket. So then I found this one for very cheap with a super clean jacket for Tequila Sunrise on the full cover presentation with this beautiful artwork that was the video poster art, which I do think is superior to the standard poster art, which is just this bottom image, but across the whole one sheet. So I was always trying to find one of these without the Warner silver bar. Then I finally found one, but it was it's got some crumpled corners and everything. And then all of a sudden I find this lovely copy in perfect shape for less than $1. So now I have two of them. But I really loved this film when I came back to it and rewatched it. This great film directed by Robert Towne. It's got some really great performances from the lead three, plus Raul Julia steals every scene he's in. It's a really great fun film to return to. It's one of the great gems of the late 80s, and this has a nice Dolby Stereo track to it. This film is beautifully shot by Conrad Hall. The DVD, even though it's really early, is pretty good, and that has a great commentary. Unfortunately, this has a flawed Blu-ray that's never been corrected. There's a chunk of the transfer that goes all wonky. So it's great to hold on to your older copies of this because, unfortunately, what should be a gorgeous Blu-ray is marred by some technical problems. This is a film that would stun people in 4K. This is a film that really deserves a nice special edition. It's really undervalued, and I would love to see the photography of this film get a 4K scan because it would be beautiful. But until then, I was finally able to upgrade to this nicer jacket of the full cover art of Tequila Sunrise. I also found this really wonderful later pressing, the remastered widescreen pressing of Abel Ferrara's King of New York with the great turn from the legend himself, Christopher Walken. It says the beautiful art on the jacket. This is actually a 1997 pressing, which is why it's very uncommon, from Live Home Video, pressed by Pioneer. It's credited with Dolby Surround, PCM audio, and unfortunately it's just movie only, but I've wanted to go back to this film. It's got a lovely new Blu-ray and 4K release from Arrow, which I wanted to check out, but I never thought I would find the LD floating around. Usually this goes for quite a bit because it's being a 1997 disc and having nice notoriety to it. It's a nice collectible LD. Usually you'll find the earlier editions, but definitely not this one floating around. So this makes just a wonderful disc package, and of course the great double feature pairing with what I think is Ferrar's masterpiece, Bad Lieutenant, which of course has the uncut NC-17 original version on LD. But that was not widescreen presentation, whereas King of New York did finally get this widescreen disc in 1997. Next is a disc you see floating around all the time. It's a super common title, but I've never seen one in this perfect of shape, and I've always meant to see this, as I really do like Curtis Hanson's other films outside of LA Confidential. I do think he was quite underrated as a director, but I finally picked up The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. This is a letterbox presentation. It is technically a Disney disc because it's a Disney disc in disguise, but this is a really perfect condition copy with a really thick gloss on the jacket. I've always wanted to see this. It's been one of those because, again, when I went back and started looking at some of Curtis Hanson's other films outside, again, of LA Confidential, I was like, I really need to see his other films. I've just never gotten around to it. So this was a super mint copy that was just floating around the bins for less than $1. So it has the Dolby Stereo soundtrack as PCM, but other than that, it's just a standard movie-only disc. And again, it is a Disney title, seeing as this is originally from Hollywood Pictures. Next is 1992's Juice, which has this really wonderful cover artwork on the usual lovely Paramount widescreen edition jacket. It looks really impressive with the actual original image being the blue tinted black and white. I haven't seen this film really since way back when on cable, I think. Of course, seen some clips here and there since, so this will be something I haven't seen in years that I will get to revisit on Laserdisc. This has the original Dolby Stereos track as PCM. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a trailer or anything, so it's just the standard movie-only release. Next, from 1993, is the great film, still without a actual Blu-ray release here in the U.S., Red Rock West, which unfortunately is stuck on LD and DVD and a 133 transfer, but this is still, seeing as we only have a DVD here, still a pretty good way of seeing this, and it doesn't pop up all the time. Unfortunately, again, it is not letterboxed, and it is a Sony Columbia title, meaning it was pressed at the DADC plant, most likely. So there is a chance this could have some laser rot on it, so I will have to play roulette with it. But it does have, as usual, of all Sony Columbia titles, has a really great write-up with some interview pieces. It is much more in-depth than the usual blurbage. It's unfortunate, though, that they printed all the text on this appropriate background. It's fine for the white text, but when you get down here to the actual credits, it's a little hard to read the text up here, but it's impossible to read the credits because they're printed in purple on the Red Rock background. This does have Dolby Surround encoded PCM on the digital track and is just a movie-only disc. I've been curious to pick up this LD because, again, the film is just stuck with a 133 DVD here in the U.S. There is a Blu-ray in Germany, I know. I think that's the best one. It's a dated master, but at least there is an HD version in widescreen floating around. I think there's also maybe an Australian release as well, but I think the German one is the go-to. So I guess I'll probably have to pick that up at some point because it seems like there is no love for this film in the home video market. But if you're in the U.S. and you're curious about this, and if you're looking for one of the best Nicolas Cage films of the 90s, well, that's this film. It's just unfortunate you'll be looking at a 133 transfer on LD or DVD. But again, it's a really underrated film. It's gotten a better reputation. It's kind of become a cult film over the years, but it's really cool to be able to check it out on LD, and hopefully it doesn't have any laser rot. Next is a really minty copy of an interesting title I've never seen, 1993's Sugar Hill. This is the Fox widescreen edition. Again, still in the shrink wrap and really nice shape, especially since it's 2 disc without a gatefold. but it is a full-blown Fox special edition. So you get a full write-up with information on the cast and crew, but it's also got a director's commentary on Analog Track 1. Plus, side 3 goes into a whole collector's section, which I guess it seems like it has some background material and some deleted scenes and some production materials, which, again, is pretty interesting for something that's not touted as a big deluxe edition. But the front cover also credits that it includes footage not in the theatrical release. So I'm guessing this is some sort of home video version. It is letterboxed. It does have Dolby Surround encoded PCM on the digital tracks, and again, the director's commentary, which also apparently goes over into the supplemental section, runs the whole disc feature and the supplements on Analog Track 1. So this just looked really interesting, and again, I didn't even realize until I was looking at the back of it that this is a full-blown special edition. So I always pick up a Laserdisc special edition when I stumbled across one, even if it's something like this and it's something I haven't seen before. I always love getting to see vintage special features back when they were originally made and presented on disc. Last, for the standard disc, I have two very much late releases. This first, and both of them are titles I've been after for years. They both elude me, and because they're late releases, they usually have a nice premium price tag on them. Now, I know this first one, I am one of the few people that actually will try and defend this film a little bit, and it's very fitting because I finally just recently was able to get a copy of the film's novelization, which is very important because the film was very much hacked apart by its studio, and the release version is pretty incomprehensible at times, and is a film that has a very terrible reputation, which of course is the 1998 live-action film version of the classic Avengers, a British television series. So of course this really needs no introduction. It is pretty notorious, but it should be understood that this film was taken by its studio, Warner Brothers, and really hacked apart. And so the theatrical release version we got is missing a lot of the stuff from the original screenplay. There's a great chunk of the film that was ripped out and mixed around. And while the original version wouldn't fix everything, it was very much a loving homage to the classic series, and especially the Emma Peel era, where it was most famous for eventually getting into some more science fiction territory. And you have a great cast with Sean Connery getting to really ham it up as the villain, and you get the scene with the conference table of evil men in giant neon-colored teddy bear suits. What's not to love? So I've always been curious to look at the LD presentation. I have the Snapper Case DVD, which I've had for years, which is, I'm assuming, pretty much a port of this. The art is identical. And I have the Blu-ray, which unfortunately is now out of print. Myself and the handful of other fans and semi-fans of this film who know about the trouble it had have been clamoring for a director's cut to be released. The director himself has been vocal about the things that happened, and the material is out there. Even a lot of the bits and pieces that were not in the film were in the various trailers, and you can look at that stuff online, or at least read about the removed materials. But the best thing to do is to find an early script draft, or to get the novelization, which was based on the original script for the film, and you can get the sense of what they were originally going for, which the film does, as we know in its release version, does not really indicate for most of its runtime. So this is a pretty nice rear cover. It has the standard design for Warner Brothers very late in the game. This was a 1998 pressing, but as you can see here on the sticker tag, that's got January 99, so most people were probably getting this the next year. But I know this is probably not the most popular title in the world, seeing as the reception in the box office it had was not very good. I saw this in the theater. I was at the perfect target age because I really just started to discover the original series in reruns, and of course it being a British spy series from the 60s, I was hooked. So it getting a movie at the same time, it was like so fortuitous, and of course the rest of the theater was totally empty. So I have some interesting memories like that, but that's one I particularly remember being thrilled there was an Avengers movie, and being a kid in an empty theater. So I'm used to talking about this film to an empty room. But anyway, this has of course a Dolby Surround PCM track and an AC3 track. The PCM is going to be the one thing the Snapper Case DVD doesn't have. because it does have AC3 5.1. So this will be able to be, had fun with an AC3 RF demodulator, but it's a particular late release I've wanted to find because I've wanted to look at the transfer so I can finally compare it to the DVD and the Blu-ray. And I do really have some fondness for this jacket art, so it is nice to finally get it on a Laserdisc jacket instead of the snapper case or the Blu-ray. And it's from this same lot, so it has this nice widescreen sticker. And this was very, very inexpensive for what I usually get outbid on this title for. It doesn't go for a ton of money, but this is usually a disc you're going to have to pay at least $25 to $30 for. It would probably be a bit more if it was better, if it had a better reception and had a bigger cult following. But for those handful of other Avengers 98 people out there, it is nice to finally be able to look at the late release Laserdisc version, even though I'm sure the master is probably going to be exactly the same as what's on the snapper case DVD. It might look a little bit better because a lot of those early snapper case DVDs have all the usual early DVD nastiness like compression issues and heavy edge enhancement and all kinds of noise and things that you didn't always get on the LD. So sometimes it's a bit of a trade-off, but of course you can get a snapper case DVD now for nothing, whereas you have to really spend a long time to get the LD. I've wanted to get this for really ever since I got into LD, when I started realizing, late releases are cool. And I realized, Avengers 98 came out on LD. I'd love to get that sometime. It would just be kind of cool to have on Laserdisc. So yeah, this has been something I have tried to get for years and years, even though I have the other versions. So it'll be fun to look at it this way and to check out the AC3 on the LD and also check out the PCM Dolby Surround. Then another late release and the last of the standalones is another disc I've tried to get for years and years. It usually goes for quite a bit and is one of several volumes that unfortunately was something Warner Bros. Didn't really pick up on, and we had to wait years until the DVD era before they approached this series again. But I was finally able to find one of the volumes that they did for the classic George Reeves 1950s Superman series under the TV's Best Adventures of Superman moniker. So this is volume 1, and they did something interesting here. They basically took the very first episode of the series and put that on side 1, and then side 2 has the very last episode from the final season. So it's a really interesting, literally beginning and end sampler of the series. I believe there were 3 other volumes, so there's 4 in total that all take various episodes from the series. And unfortunately, at that time, especially in LD here in the US, you weren't really getting complete series releases outside of Star Trek runs, really. But it's a shame we couldn't get some more television favorites in at least more episode runs. But it is cool they did this. But the reason why I really wanted to look at these, I have some of the seasons of Adventures of Superman on DVD, but what really drew me in is my nerdiness and in terms of transfer comparisons, because they actually tucked in one of the classic Fleischer Studios Superman shorts, the legendary 1940s Paramount cartoons that for me are the pinnacle of animation. But they snuck one in on each of these discs, and of course these discs also feature PCM audio. So since I've done comparisons and looked at pretty much every other official and bootleg and public domain version of the Fleischer shorts I can get my hands on, looking for audio differences and editing quirks and things like that, and color timing as well, I've always been curious to see if the versions of the Fleischer cartoons on these discs were similar to the official Warner Brothers restored versions that came out on the DVD box sets and later a standalone version, and if they had any of those issues in terms of audio errors and color timing that those versions have. And so I was finally able to look at Volume 1, which contains the first of the Fleischer cartoons, the original short Superman. Most unfortunately, though, at the very start of Side 2, where the cartoon is, that's where this disc has a little bit of laser rot. So fortunately, it clears up relatively quickly, but I was watching through it and I started getting really nervous. I'm like, no, please make it through. So there's a little speckling, and then there's some lines that appear and things, unfortunately. But that does clear up pretty quickly, but it does mar the opening of the short a little bit, unfortunately. And of course, it had to be right there for what I was most excited for. But it was very revealing because I was able to tell it looks like the same source that Warner Brothers used later on, 2006, 2008 era, for the Superman DVD boxes and the restored versions of the shorts, is what they used here on this. And this actually looks pretty much hands off. The audio is really clear and it's PCM encoded here. So basically, they were sitting on these versions that were far superior in quality to everything else that's been floating around. And it took until getting tossed on as DVD extras for the Superman theatrical films for them to actually get released. And there was an earlier Image Laserdisc release as the Max and Dave Fleischer Superman cartoons that was also released on DVD, which I have. That uses, slightly more worn and different print sources, whereas Warner's ostensibly is working from the best vault elements, and they went back to those for the DVD transfers. So I really want to find the other three volumes of this, and hopefully I can find another copy of this that doesn't have the rot issue at the start of side 2. You don't think about laser rot on late releases and issues like that, but they can. Issues like that can occasionally crop up. I do have some other releases. Batman and Robin is a known rotter, that being a 97 film, late 97, early 98 release. That one's okay. It's got a little bit of speckling, but there are a lot of Death Rider copies of that out there. So rot can still happen and was still happening even on some Warner discs at this time period. But it's a really cool piece to finally have one of these. And of course, you get a really interesting LD presentation of the first and very last episode of the classic George Reeves 50s television series. And you get to see the print transfer quality before they did the cleanup process for the DVD versions. And you get PCM mono soundtracks, which, while they can have some bits of noise here and there, it just has a different quality to then compare watching these to then watching the restored, cleaned up versions on those wonderful DVD sets. So if you're a fan of the classic George Reeves Superman series, this is a fun LD to have. But again, because it is such a late release, and I don't think they printed very many of these, you rarely stumble across them. It's also a little hard to tell them apart because they all pretty much have a similar or the same cover, the only difference being the actual volume number and then telling you what the episodes in which Fleischer short they included. So, it would have been cool to get some more of these, but of course, Laserdisc was dying off. It would have been amazing to have gotten a Laserdisc set of the Warner-held versions of the Fleischer shorts to have a cleaner version on LD to close out the format with. But I'm just glad I was finally able to check out these, because these have been on my wish list for far too long, simply to look at the quality of both the episodes and the Fleischer cartoons. So that's it for this particular update. Again, I usually wait to try to get a handful of LDs before I make a video, and then before I know it, what was once 3 Laserdiscs becomes 5 LDs, becomes, oh crap, I've got an entire box of discs to go over. So I knew it was definitely time for another video. It'll be interesting to see what else pops up in this lot that, again, my local store has gotten, and they said it was at least somewhere around 4,000 discs. So it seems almost on a weekly basis another box or two turns up. So I think they're just going through a handful at a time. And so far, it's been some really interesting things mixed in with the usual common bits here and there. And when I first realized, oh no, these are rental discs, I was a little leery. But then I looked more closely and I'm like, these are the most immaculately preserved rental copies I have ever seen. It looks more like a collector got these and made their own custom stickers and things, not that it was a rental store. And again, the disc surfaces are, practically immaculate with no scratches or scuff marks or anything. So it'll be interesting again to see what turns up in the next few weeks. I've made plans already to just occasionally check back by and see, if another box has been put out, and then try to resist the temptation on all the ones that are very affordable at less than $1. But it's always fun to see what turns up, and of course, every once in a while, somewhere nearby might eventually get a lot like this, where there's just so many discs they can't put them all out at once, and it's just, who knows what will turn up. So I think that's a good indication to always keep an eye on your local stores or record stores or anywhere that you might think has a Laserdisc near you. Even if you have to ask and they say, oh no, we don't have any of those, or say, "What's that?" Or then if they do that, every once in a while they might go, "Hey, wait a minute. I think we got some in the back," and then there's like a box or two, and you'll find some crazy rare gem in there that you've just been after for ages. So it always helps to ask around, or to look at a new shop you haven't tried yet, and you never know what Laserdisc gems are out there. And every once in a while you get lucky, and there's some huge lot that's been traded in somewhere that then you and maybe the handful of other Laserdisc collectors in your area get to pick over for the next few months. So hopefully you found something to add to your own want list, or found something you might want to dust off the shelf and give a spin, or take from your if you're like me, your never ending watch pile that you're probably never going to get to the end of. So to close out, I'd like to say, definitely support your local independent record stores, where it's pretty much our only source of finding LDs outside of the Laserdisc database and eBay. And keep your disc spinning, keep your players alive, keep the format alive. Even though it is a dead format, it's still fun to collect and enjoy watching. And thanks ever so much for watching. Program material has been recorded only on other side of this Laserdisc. Please turn over.